Allison!
Yeah!
Hi. How you doing?
Good.
Yeah!
I can't see any of you, so whatever you're doing, I'll just have to imagine. This is called Bank Fraud for Dummies. Let's put it simply. I was fucked. 27 years old, living an hour outside of Prague, teaching English to 300 students, most of whose names I didn't know and would never learn. Living on the dusty edges of a little town, so hard up against the railroad tracks that I could feel my teeth rattle when the train rolled through. I should stop here and offer a definition of potential bank fraud. Basically, being so broke-ass that you would sell your blood if you only spoke enough Czech to do it. Being so desperate that you would hawk your sperm if only you could produce some. As it was, I was riding the subway illegally, coasting on the goodwill of the honor system. I was eating homemade Czech potato soup by night, made with the cheapy bottom barrel produce that I found in the basement of the local Tesco. I was wearing shoes with holes in them, and my soles were beginning to flap. It wasn't genteel poverty. It was just plain suck-ass brokenness. And I probably would have kept muddling along in my ever-worsening shoes if something hadn't happened to wake me up. Here it was. My bank account went into the negative. That meant the ATM machine giving me a polite cough or a straight-out laugh, and then spitting my card right back at me without a single crown to accompany it. I had a tiny bit of cash, and when I say tiny, we're talking cup of coffee tiny, and make sure it's not the fancy coffee. And that was it. Woman cannot live on coffee money alone. Let me offer another definition of potential bank fraud. Your ass hard up against the wall. I was making $250 a month. My teaching agreement covered my rent, local transportation, and even some meals, but still, $250 a month. People back home in the Bay Area spent that on organic peanut butter. I was expected to live on it. But as can be said for most of these situations, it was my own fuck-up, my own bad judgment. You can trace that back across the ocean and way over to the west end of the continent when I hatched my Let's Live Overseas plan while sitting in front of my 133 megahertz desktop in my dingy Oakland apartment. It sounded good from there. It sounded good the way anything did, in that way that anything halfway across the world might sound good when you're bumming on your life. It's the I'm going to be a different person illusion. But I was what is colloquially known as a damn fool. I could have saved myself a lot of time and trouble if I'd just accepted that fact and called my local temp agency for a mind-numbing local job. But I had ambitions. I had goals. I wanted adventure, and that desire far outweighed any grain of common sense that I might have found somewhere under my couch cushions. So let's get back to the point. I was fucked. I sat in my little garage conversion apartment outside of Prague in the dusty edge of town and pondered my options: beg, borrow, steal. Begging meant humble emails, lots of lines like, I'm sorry to ask, but... Get out your metaphorical knee pads, because begging meant kneeling and opening your mouth and doing what had to be done. A suck-off in words, so to speak. A real blowjob would have been less humiliating. So I scratched begging off the list. Borrowing, wasn't that the same as begging? You had to do one to get the other. That was my experience at any rate. Anyone who was going to give me money was going to have to be begged. My credit was a sore subject in the best of times. There was no way I was getting any money from any sort of institution. I could call up Gary Coleman over at Cash Call, and the little midget would tell me to go fuck myself. And those guys would have given money to my cat for doing nothing more than yawning, which left stealing. I was no stranger to the concept. I'd heisted my share of lipsticks when I was a preteen and snuck cigarettes out of my mother's purse a few years later. As an adult, I'd lifted money from petty cash jars at work, and even on one memorable occasion, from an envelope being passed around to collect for Girl Scout cookies. Yes, I'd stolen from the Girl Scouts. That could qualify me as an expert. I sat up a little straighter in my chair. Stealing, it was proactive. It was an independent maneuver. It showed focus and goal orientation. All of those prized American traits I was supposed to represent here in the smelly crotch pit of Eastern Europe. But how to do it? Execution was never my strong suit. I was the idea girl, the one who could come up with a million different ways to untie the knot. But when it actually came to yanking the damn thing apart, I stepped aside and let someone more proactively American than me do the dirty work. Here, though, there was no one else. Loneliness was a major part of the experience. If I'd fooled myself into thinking I had nothing at home, I now knew how wrong I was. Friends, family, a common country, a shared language. Hell, I'd be able to call up the bank and do the dirty work over the phone. I'd be able to... That was it. I'd steal directly from the bank itself. I'd steal from out under their noses, behind their backs, all those cliches. I'd steal the way my mother swiped cash from my father's wallet when he was in the shower, working stealthily with the victim in close proximity. Sometimes the most efficient method, certainly the most adrenaline-laden. Stealing meant lying. I'd known that for as long as my memory stretched back. It meant lying to someone else, to yourself, a denial of the rules in favor of what you wanted or needed. So I was going to lie to the bank. About what? Outside it had begun to snow. As I watched the flakes drift from sky to soil, I thought of a lyric from Shaggy. Say it wasn't you. Granted, Shaggy was talking about getting laid right in front of his girlfriend, but the principle was correct. Deny the facts that lay right before the bank and see what consequence brought. I was going to challenge each and every recent charge I had made. At the very least, it would get me a temporary credit, and at best, that credit would be permanent. After all, I rationalized, the way so many deadbeats do, who deserves that money more, me or the bank? I picked up the phone. I had a landline with no restrictions, meaning I could do things like call the United States in order to defraud Bank of America. As I dialed, I wondered which call center they'd connect me to. Did it really matter? Didn't they all look and sound the same? As long as I got what I wanted, I didn't really care. Except for some odd reason, I did. I wanted to be connected to someone in the Bay Area. I wanted to talk to someone who was home, because home, as Paul Simon once sung, is where I wanted to be. Someone named Carol answered my call. She had a southern accent. I assumed she was somewhere in Atlanta. I could handle being in Atlanta. Anywhere but here, the snowy and dusty country that didn't seem to understand the use of vowels and words. In Czech, the letter Z is a word. I am not shitting you. Carol, I'm a little concerned, I said. I'd read somewhere that if you used a person's name, it made you seem a little more familiar to them, a little more sympathetic. I needed all the sympathy I could get. I spun a story about losing my debit card back in Oakland. I spun it quite well, I thought. My story had something to do with a dropped purse on an AC Transit bus. I started to believe my lie. That's when you know you're lying well. Okay, she said, let's check the charges from the last few weeks. She read them off one by one, places with names like Kavarna Evropa and U Rudolphinium. It took her a while to pronounce these names, as it apparently does for me, as if in some way they seemed to argue with her tongue. And I disputed every single one. My heart was not racing as I did this. My palms were not sweaty. My father once told me that I lie as easily as I breathe, and lying to the bank was just about as simple. They gave me a temporary credit. It became permanent. It added up to more than $500. That would be more than enough to live on until my next paycheck, a nice cushion when I needed it. I hung up the phone in elation, but a slight prickle of worry. What if I got caught? 2 words. I didn't. Thank you.
Yeah!